Hello, howdy, welcome to all of you. Welcome to the first part of a new series of videos called Abysmal Takes, where I find myself looking into random crap for a bit and give my own 2 cents. The pinnacle of commentary, really. Today, we're going to be looking into some familiar territory, that being zoophilia. You know, the family-friendly way to say bestiality nowadays. I've already done 2 videos covering a zoophile podcast that have recently been gutted from YouTube, so if you want to know more about my thoughts on that, you can definitely look into those. But for the uninitiated, zoophilia is a group of people who advocate for animal rights. On the surface, this sounds like what PETA is trying to be, but when you look into it, things start to get a bit wonky. Because on top of their affinity for animals and their push for veganism, they also push for shagging the family dog. The reason I think people completely resent anyone who chooses to title themselves as a zoophile is just because of that. They're trying to bang animals. So with the summary out of the way, we can get into the group itself. But first, I have a little announcement of sorts.
I said we ain't going in there. Something ain't right. Horses got ESP or some shit about this kind of stuff.
For this video, we won't actually be looking into the content of Zoofilia now, since I've already done that twice. Instead, this is just to announce that the podcast had actually gotten removed recently for breaking YouTube's policies. But not surprisingly, they just went to make another channel, another 3 channels actually, just to try and circumvent their termination. Now the reason I'm even mentioning this to begin with is because they seem to have a plan to parasite their way back into the website. Operation Zootube is what they call it. So along with remaking their channel with the same TOS breaking content, they've opted to use their fans to spread that same content, making it less likely for YouTube to remove it, assuming YouTube does its job in the first place. The page is essentially a guidebook on how to post and spam their content, even mentioning at times how their content could maybe just possibly have the possibility to violate YouTube TOS. So this is just a heads up for anyone watching this video. If your recommended gets flooded with these 2 trying to sell you dog porking, you'll know why. Now, we could talk about Zoofilia the Now ex-co-host Fausty and his fantasy bestiality farm that involved mice covered in Vaseline. I still can't get over that. Something that popped up about this guy was his tweets, where he tries to lump furries in with zoophiles, claiming that a large portion of the furry fandom are technically zoophiles. There are also his tweets where he gets angry that furries won't accept his sexual orientation, as well as believing furries hate him in the same way self-hating gays pretend to be homophobes. But for now, let's just focus on the first one. Furries technically being zoophiles. I would like to dispute that claim, but unfortunately, zoophiles appear to have parasited their way into the fandom. I've seen myself and multiple other people, furry or otherwise, making attempts to spread awareness of this stuff and weed those animal fondlers out of here, but they're pretty deep in there. Like a pregnant spider, you squish it and those little crappers spread by the dozens. Now, the reason I went on that tangent is because the claim that furries and zoophiles are connected unfortunately has some weight to it. One of these connections being Payden Reilly, otherwise known as Crusader Cat. To give you a rundown of this guy's offenses, I'm simply going to read you Crusader's own Kiwi Farms confession. At age 16, he got 2 kittens for his birthday, and human, sexuality wasn't enough for him. It wouldn't satisfy him. He just thought about it too much. When his cats would lie on top of him, the body, it would arouse him when he was pawing off. So he would start kissing them, and then eventually he just decided that he would commit bestiality. It wasn't easy because they would claw, they weren't declawed yet. He would commit bestiality in several ways, including dry humping, hand jobs, and attempted oral sex. He tried various positions, except for intercourse, because the cats were too small. He was so out of control that he wanted to have himself castrated or sterilized to stop the abuse of his poor cats. Now, this person, I have a bit of a confession to make here. This Christian is me. I am the one who is struggling with fur erotica and bestiality. As one can tell, Crusader has a history of being rather crude, to say the least. Once he had gotten on the internet, he quickly moved towards not safe for work bestial content, managing to discover a yiff in the process. You could say the openness and welcoming nature of an already non-normal fandom led to zoophiles working their way in and giving off the false view Crusader Cat also saw. However, Now we move over to someone who supposedly moved on from zoophilic acts to someone who fights for animal screwing almost as hard as Fausty did. Alewski is his name, killing bigots is his game. His game also seems to consist of 25 years worth of screwing dogs. Some even behind the backs of their owners, which he admitted when he was confronted by another zoophile. As someone who's been a zoophile for a quarter of a century, he finds himself rallying for this right to this day. The reason I know this is because he chose to do so on one of my YouTube videos covering Zooier Than Thou. The only issue is, being the idiot I most certainly am, I went and eradicated any possible smudge he left on my channel before looking into who he was. But no worries, because I have screenshots of what matters. The end of our discussion. My last reply to him went on about how zoophilia had resulted in multiple cases of ASA, or animal sexual abuse, along with saying how animals couldn't consent in a Ben Shapiro-like manner, as my friend put it. What followed was an essay explaining why he has every right to fornicate an animal. An entire essay that only seems to make sense if you were to assume that dogs and other animals have the same mentality as a human, which just so happens to not be the case. Dogs can't give consent to a human, no matter how much you compare them to the deaf and the mute. But then again, this is the same guy who sees a dog tied to a wall getting molested and thinks, yeah, that's consensual. Totally not trained to do what it just did by some sick fuck. Apart from the fact that this guy just can't take a meme for some reason, he's no stranger to getting into verbal nonsense on Twitter. You know, the same Twitter where a woman apparently got doxxed for a hairstyle she had on her Animal Crossing character. A majority of the time it's just to respond to people saying zoophilia is bad, but it's these arguments where you get the points he's trying to make, the reasoning he has behind screwing the family dog. Here we have a tweet where Alewski claims to be a dog groomer, and that he's allowed to molest dogs because there's no abuse happening behind the scenes. This is where he would get into an argument with a veterinarian, where she claims that they don't need evidence to show that dogs are naturally submissive, because any dog owner would know this. Taking this as a sign of victory, he would go on to gloat about his self-validation before she would go on to issue a challenge for him. She asked for him to DM his proof of his certificate, employer, or his clientele. This way there would be proof that Alewski has any experience with dogs other than just sexually abusing them. He responded with the usual this-that fallacy, saying that she's assuming that he abuses dogs without proof, even though she asked for proof that you weren't. What? And below that he responds with, I won't provide evidence that puts me and my dogs in danger. A pretty weird response when you consider that there's supposedly nothing wrong with what he's doing. I mean, surely there wouldn't have been anything wrong with letting people know you're a professional dog groomer, as well as a professional dog groomer. Also, I'm not sure being concerned about the safety of you and your dogs is very believable when you have pictures and videos of you guys circling around the internet. Your actions don't make the most plausible case for that. So, it seems dog screwing has become a recreational pastime for a few out there. Some of them resulting in rather tragic results, while others, I'd rather not think about for too long. Zoophiles far and wide have been making claims that they know what's best for animals, and that they help them more than the average person. But all the while, all you hear from them is about how they screw their dogs and how they consent to being used for their owner's sexual gratification. It's less animal activism and more the lines of a super PETA. Their values of being vegan and caring for animals is something I can get behind, but man, if zoophiles didn't screw dogs and equate them to being on the same level as humans, you might have had me then there. You might have had me. I'm a fan of dogs and cats, but not to the point of treating them like I would an equal significant other. Anyways, that's about all I have on the issue of zoophilia. I might not seriously focus on it in the future. It'll probably be in passing as a crime against humanity that someone commits, except for another zoophilia podcast that wormed its way onto YouTube. That I will be covering pretty soon. Anyways, for now, be sure to leave a comment sharing your thoughts on zoophilia, like and subscribe if you found the content interesting, and I'll see you next video.